Do note that the incorrect examples are exaggerated on purpose. In my opinion, the correct examples do properly show what they are meant to show. However, they are in no means perfect. As an exercise, see if you can spot issues with my form in the correct examples. If you do, go and leave a comment down below. In this episode, we will take a look at horizontal cuts. Once again, we will only cover full long edge cuts. Transitions, such as chaining multiple cuts, parallel posts, and so on, will also have a dedicated episode. As stepping is a complicated subject, and as it will also have a dedicated episode of its own, we'll be doing all of the cuts in this episode standing still. For all the exercises which don't have a solid target, you are supposed to use the Swordwind for diagnostics. The Swordwind is explained in detail in the Why and How to Train Cutting episode. The link is in the description. Later in this episode, there will be a section on cutting angle. During all other sections, presume a completely horizontal cut. Which foot you have forwards makes very little difference when it comes to horizontal cuts. Because of this, we will be doing all of the exercises in 3 different stances. One is having the starting side foot forwards. This makes it a bit easier to have proper follow through. Another is having the end side foot forwards. This makes it a bit more easier to get to a comfortable starting position. The last one is having your feet side by side. This is very common when you end up at a wrestling distance, and it works very well for low cuts at a very short distance. I'll be talking more about this in the targeting section of this episode. In this section, I'll go through the basic exercise for horizontal cuts from the dominant side. In the next section, I'll go through the same exercise from the non-dominant side. As mentioned in the intro, we will be doing all of the progressions of this exercise with the dominant foot forwards, with the non-dominant foot forwards, and with the feet side by side. We will be starting with the non-dominant foot forwards, as it makes it easier to get to a proper starting position. I'm not saying it is easier to cut one way or the other, as from my experience it seems to be up to personal preference. We are starting with the non-dominant foot forwards as, again from my personal experience, it seems that most people find this the easiest to start with. Remember that you should train all 3 ways of standing and find out which is the most comfortable for you. Before we get to the exercise itself, let's talk shortly about stopping horizontal cuts. Unlike with descending and ascending cuts, your hands and arms are supposed to stay level throughout the whole cut. This means that there is no rotation around your shoulder. Thus, the only rotation there is around your spine. Because of this, your core is playing a very important part in stopping horizontal cuts. If you do not brace correctly, you will overswing. You will also need to pay attention to your arm structure. If you let your shoulders, elbows, or wrists to rotate, the sword will swing behind you. This poses an issue. You need to power your cut from your legs or in some cases from your core. To stop the cut, you need to lock your core, hips and legs. This means that you need to use the same muscles to power and to stop the cut. This is the reason why this is only the 3rd cut we are learning, even though it only has rotation around a single axis. With descending cuts, you power the cut from your legs and your back muscles. To stop the cut, you simply need to have a good structure. With ascending cuts, you power the cut from your legs and your shoulders. To stop the cut, you need to use your back muscles with quite a lot of help from gravity. And with horizontal cuts, you use the same muscles to power and stop the cut. This makes this the most difficult cut when it comes to power generation. It is easy to stop generating power too soon and leave the cut short. Or to keep generating power for too long and thus overswing. Or get the amount of rotation correct but not generate enough power to begin with. Before doing any of these exercises, remember to warm up properly. Here is how you construct the starting position with the non-dominant foot forwards. Have your non-dominant foot forwards. Remember to have a good wide stance with your knees bent, front foot's toes pointing forwards, back foot's angled to the side so that the stance feels comfortable. Have your weight evenly distributed on both legs. Have your hips and shoulders pointing roughly 45 degrees towards your dominant side. Face forwards. Have your arms fully extended at shoulder level and the sword completely horizontal with the long edge pointing to the direction of the cut. Make sure that you have a proper handshake grip and that your arms are centered. Don't push your shoulders forwards. Make sure that they are properly supported in a neutral position. Don't let the sword sag. Have both of your hands at the same level and have tight enough grip to keep the blade level. Once again, we will not start with a progression which intentionally limits your hip rotation. However, feel free to try such a progression if you wish. If you decide to do so, refer to the Descending Cuts episode for a more detailed explanation. Now, let's start with the first progression. As said, we will be powering the cut from our legs instead of from our core. Stand in the starting position. Make sure your hips and chest point roughly 45 degrees to your dominant side. Keep your face towards your target in front of you. Make sure your sword is completely horizontal. Tighten your grip, brace your core. Power the rotation from your legs. After cutting through your imaginary target, stop generating power and lock your legs, hips and core to stop the cut. Stop bracing and loosen your grip. Return to the starting position. Repeat. Start this exercise at a relaxed speed and only add more power after you are comfortable with the lower intensity cuts. You should keep training this progression until you can properly keep your sword level and clearly hear the sword wind. Any change in the height of the sword is easiest to see from the side. I recommend that you either video yourself or ask someone to watch you from the side when you do this exercise. After you can do this progression consistently with all three stances, move to the next progression. At this point, you are also ready to cut tatami or some other cutting medium. Remember, you should not do any special adjustments to the exercise when cutting a cutting medium. Just do the exercise as if the target was not there. You just need to be at a correct distance. For a more detailed explanation, please see the Cutting and Reading Tatami episode. The link is in the description. Do note that before cutting any cutting media, you should watch the targeting section of this episode first. The most important thing is to keep the blade level during the cut. Generally speaking, there are two things which may cause this not to happen. The first one is that you move your hands up or down during the cut. It is rather common that you start and end the cut at the same level, but during the cut you go up with your hands and then come back down, or vice versa. The second one is that your stance height changes during the cut. It is essential that the blade stays level during a horizontal cut. Failing at this is the most common reason to get stuck in the target. Another common issue is that the blade is not angled correctly. It is more common that the point sags a bit, but it is also possible that the point points up slightly. Also, make sure that you have a proper handshake grip. As your hands are side by side, it is quite common that your grip starts to slip to a 90-degree grip. This will turn your cut into a slice. Remember that the base of your thumb should be in line with your forearm. For a more detailed explanation, please refer to the How to Hold a Longsword episode. Another thing to look for is keeping your feet planted throughout the cut. With horizontal cuts, people have a tendency to rotate on the balls of their feet. This will make follow-through much more difficult, and it is also often tied to difficulties with keeping level. A common reason which causes this to happen is that you overswing. As you need to rotate further to overswing, it is likely that you will not be able to do the whole rotation without compensating by rotating on the balls of your feet. To make sure that there is as little need to compensate as possible, limit your rotation during the cut to roughly 90 degrees. Once again, if you feel any discomfort in your knees during the cut, it might be necessary to rotate your feet. Before you do that, try different foot positions to make sure that the rotation is actually necessary. If you then find it necessary to rotate, try to minimize the amount of rotation and don't rise up to the balls of your feet. Simply rotate on the balls of your feet and then plant your heels back down. Naturally, all the normal edge alignment issues are also common with horizontal cuts. For a more detailed explanation, please see the Recipe for Successful Cuts episode and the previous episodes of the series. After you can do the first progression of the basic exercise with the non-dominant foot forwards, it is time to do it with the dominant foot forwards and with the feet side by side. Here is how you take the starting positions for these variants of the exercise. For the dominant foot forwards variant, start with a proper fencing stance. Have your weight evenly distributed on both legs. Have your hips and shoulders point roughly 45 degrees towards your dominant side. Face forwards. Have your arms fully extended at shoulder level and the sword completely horizontal with the long edge pointing to the direction of the cut. Make sure that you have a proper handshake grip and that your arms are centered. For the feet side by side stance, take a bit wider than shoulder with neutral stance. Have your toes point slightly outwards. Bend your knees. Have your hips and shoulders point roughly 45 degrees towards your dominant side. Face forwards. Have your arms fully extended at shoulder level and the sword completely horizontal with the long edge pointing to the direction of the cut. Make sure that you have a proper handshake grip and that your arms are centered. Now, perform the exercise exactly as with the non-dominant foot forwards. There is very little difference between the stances. Generally, it is a bit more likely that you overswing with these variants. The common issues and solutions are the same as with the non-dominant foot forwards. Now for the second progression of this exercise. In this progression, we are concentrating on removing our tell of tightening our grip and bracing our core before the cut. Stand in the starting position. Make sure your hips and chest point roughly 45 degrees to your dominant side. Keep your face toward your target in front of you. Make sure your sword is completely horizontal. Slowly start the cutting motion. Tighten your grip and brace. After your grip is firm and you have braced, finish the cut at proper intensity. After cutting through your imaginary target, stop generating power and lock your legs, hips and core to stop the cut. Stop bracing and loosen your grip. Return to the starting position. Repeat. Especially in the beginning, the part of the cut during which you tighten your grip and brace can be very slow. After you can properly grip and brace during the cutting motion, gradually start adding more speed to the cut until it becomes a single smooth action. This progression should become a staple in your training routine, even after you move to more advanced exercises where you start the cut from a different guard position or which add actions before or after the basic cut. You should still come back to this progression from time to time. In my opinion, this is the most important exercise for horizontal cuts. Once again, only progress to the next progression after you can do this with all three stances. The most common issue with this progression is edge alignment. As you are now trying to do multiple things while tightening your grip, it is more likely that you make mistakes. This is why start simple, add complexity is such an important concept. The most common edge alignment issues come from having an uneven grip and twisting the sword one way or another. If need be, you can start the cutting motion and then grip and brace. After that, stop and check your grip. Then continue the cut after you have checked your grip. However, only do this until you get your grip and edge alignment fixed. Then move back to doing this progression without the stop. It is better to slow down the movement instead of completely stopping. Now the same progression with the other two stances. The starting positions are the same as for the previous progression. Once again, perform the progression exactly the same as with the non-dominant foot forwards. The common issues and their fixes are the same as with the non-dominant foot forwards. For the minor differences, please refer to the previous progression. The third progression will keep the cutting portion exactly the same as with the previous progression. Instead, we will be adding movement. As mentioned earlier, cutting with a step will be handled in an episode of its own. In this progression, we will be taking a look at closing in and retreating from a target. As distance is the focus of this progression, it is recommended that you do it with a target you can cut over. You can simply use a piece of clothing or something similar tossed to the ground. Or you can use an empty cutting stand if you have access to one. I recommend something elevated, such as an empty cutting stand, as it is easier to read distance with it and you don't have to look down to the ground to see your target. For a detailed explanation on proper cutting distance, please refer to the Recipe for Successful Cuts episode. The link is in the description. Now to the exercise itself. Stand in the starting position some distance, such as 3 meters away from your target. Close in to the correct cutting distance. Stop. You should aim to be able to end up in a proper cutting stance without needing to shuffle your feet in place. Cut as explained in the previous progression and return to the starting position. Stop. Retreat from the target using simple backwards, advancing steps until you are where you started. Concentrate on making sure that you end up at the correct cutting distance. This should be done by varying your step distance as needed. You should also vary your starting distance so that the exercise doesn't boil down to counting steps. After you get comfortable with the exercise, you should start to return to a different guard when retreating. Make sure that you make a complete cut first and only then return to a guard. More rapid transitions will be handled in the transitions episode. Retreating to different directions, such as forwards and past the target, will be handled in the stepping episode. The most common issues with this progression are incorrect cutting distance and bad cutting stance. Incorrect distance to the target is caused by not varying your step distance based on your distance to the target. This in itself can be caused by misreading the distance in the first place. The best way to gauge distance is to watch directly from the side and use high enough target. Once again, A training partner or videoing yourself are the best ways to do this. A bad cutting stance is usually caused by advancing in a too narrow stance and not properly widening it when stopping to cut. With your last step, you should end up in a proper cutting stance. With this progression, do it with both simple advancing steps and with crossing steps. As with the previous progressions, learn to do this progression with all three stances. There are minimal differences between the stances. The most notable thing is that you might need to vary your distance slightly. When cutting a cutting medium, it is recommended that you close in to the target in a guard. You can do it as explained in this progression. For a more detailed explanation, please refer to the Descending Cuts episode. This progression should become a constant part of your training regime, as it is excellent for practicing reading distance. When you want to do more repetitions on the cut, the previous progression is a better choice. However, you should still have at least a few repetitions of this progression in every training session. Remember that every progression of the basic exercise can also be done with a PEL. Just remember that your training should concentrate on doing the progressions without any hard targets. For a more detailed explanation on doing the exercises with a PEL, please refer to the previous episodes of this series. Before starting with the non-dominant side exercise, go and stab that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. You will be doing the same three progressions from the non-dominant side as you did from the dominant side. I recommend that you learn the first progression from the dominant side first and only then start with these ones. However, there is no need to learn all of the dominant side progressions before moving to the non-dominant side ones. You can start with whichever stance you found the easiest to work with on the dominant side. Take your time with the progressions and only move to the next one after you are comfortable with the current one. For the most part, the most common issues and their fixes stay the same. In this section, I will detail the few differences there are when cutting from the non-dominant side. Basically, they boil down to the fact that you need to have your arms crossed when cutting. The starting position on the non-dominant side is exactly the same as on the dominant side. The only difference is that now you need to have your arms crossed. You also must have your non-dominant arm bent slightly, as it can't possibly pass through your dominant arm. However, you should have your non-dominant arm as straight as possible. This is one of the cases in which it is okay to have your arm bent throughout the cut. Concentrate on having your dominant arm completely straight and having your non-dominant arm as straight as possible. As always, remember to keep center. If you have difficulties with the range of motion of your forearms, I highly recommend that you stretch them. A limited range of motion can increase the risk of injury. For instructions on how to stretch your forearms, please refer to a professional. You should also warm up and stretch your forearms and wrist thoroughly before starting with the exercises. This can decrease the risk of injury. If the starting position causes any pain, you should not proceed to cut, as it can lead to injury. Once again, on instructions how to stretch your forearms to increase the range of motion for forearm supination, please refer to a professional. As you may have noticed, your wrists are touching each other in the starting position. This makes it basically impossible to tighten your grip using the ringing motion, or at least it makes it impossible at the beginning of a cut. I recommend that you ring slightly when you get into the starting position. However, do not ring so much that you would have a cutting tight grip, as it will tire your arms out very quickly. Then, when you are ready to cut, Tighten the rest of the way by simply squeezing as you would when gripping anything else. Mostly the issues are the same as from the dominant side. In fact, some people find this cross-armed position more stable and easier to cut with. As you have your non-dominant arm bent, it is also less likely that you end up with a 90-degree grip. For example, I personally find this side easier to cut from. A non-grip related issue is that as you have your non-dominant arm bent, it is more likely that you have extension issues. Simply make sure that you have your dominant arm fully extended during the cut. Targeting with horizontal cuts poses some unique difficulties. Before we get to those, let's get the easy one out of the way. As with any other cut, you can change the height of the cut by changing your stance height. This is the easiest targeting technique for horizontal cuts, and it has no impact on the cut itself. The only thing is that the more extreme your stance height is, the harder it is to stay level. The other two options are the ones which change the cut in a significant way. You can angle the blade to hit at different heights. Or you can bend your elbows to bring your forearms lower. We will start with the second one as it is significantly easier to explain. With this technique, we will be intentionally breaking the rule about maximum extension. What this gives us is the ability to keep the blade completely level. I will explain why this is so important when discussing the other targeting technique. For now, just trust me that this is important. The technique is simple. Simply bend your elbows and bring them closer to your torso. Simultaneously, keep your forearms horizontal and your wrist straight. This allows you to target anywhere between shoulder and waist level. Combining this with a lower stance allows you to target roughly to hip level. Some people may be able to go even lower, but personally I don't see much use for that. The other targeting style is better choice when targeting very low targets. As said, you lose extension with this technique. The lower you go, the shorter your reach is. As explained in the structure episode, this makes cutting more difficult. Having less extension decreases our tip speed, which then decreases our cutting energy. However, this technique allows us to keep the blade completely level. One benefit from this is that this kind of a cut is very good at wrestling range. In my experience, one of the most common uses for a horizontal cut is to cut to chest or waist height from a very close distance. The basic situation being against an aggressive opponent. Your opponent tries to close in with an attack which you parry. As your opponent tries to grapple you, you riposte with a short-range horizontal cut to the torso. This makes it very difficult to parry the cut. Even if the cut gets stuck, which I would say is more than likely, you are still relatively safe as your opponent is trying to grapple you. You can start implementing this targeting variant to your training starting with the first progression. However, learn the first progression properly at shoulder level first. As you do not have maximum extension with this targeting style, keeping level is going to be more difficult. When targeting like this, try to have your upper arms in contact with your chest for more support. This makes it easier to keep consistent extension throughout the cut, which means it is easier to keep the cut level. Maintaining consistent extension is also where most people have difficulties with this technique. If your extension changes, the sword will move vertically. This will end up with the sword getting stuck during the cut. Other than that, the common issues with this targeting style are the same as with the basic exercise. This way of doing horizontal cuts is a good way of getting all out of your expensive tatami mats. When you don't want to do a diagonal cut so as not to hit the back, a horizontal cut is a good choice. The last way of targeting a horizontal cut is angling the blade. This might seem simpler and better than the previous way, but it is not so. When cutting like this, it is impossible to have straight trajectory. As explained in the Recipe for Successful Cuts episode, we want to have our cut travel on a 2D plane in a 3D world. Or to simplify, we want to have our cutting trajectory completely straight. If we angle our arms to target like this, it is no longer possible. You can visualize the issue like this. You are cutting along the hem of an umbrella. Your shoulders are at the top, the point of the sword is at the hem. Your arm and sword are one of the ribs of the umbrella. As you cut, the sword travels along the surface of the open umbrella. If you imagine watching this from below, you can see that the sword is now traveling in a circular motion instead of a straight line. I call this the umbrella effect. What this means is that the sword is always turning ever so slightly. The curvature is actually rather small, but it will have a noticeable difference, especially with wider targets. At this point, it is important to note that this is no longer technically a horizontal cut. Many cutting tournament rule sets would either penalize this kind of an horizontal cut heavily, or they would deem it incorrect cut in the first place. However, I think that in a martial context this is a valid way of cutting, and at the core this is still an angled horizontal cut. But as said, be wary that this might not be a good choice for competitions. However, when fencing, this is one of the common ways to make a leg cut with a longsword. You might think to turn your wrist to keep the blade level, and indeed, this would fix the curved trajectory issue. However, this will cause your wrist to be in a structurally weaker position. This makes it more difficult to maintain edge alignment and trajectory on impact, negating the gained benefit. This will also subject your wrist to a higher risk of injury. As with the previous way of targeting, you can start to incorporate this style of targeting to your training starting with the first progression. However, once again, learn a proper shoulder level horizontal cut first. This way of targeting has no special difficulties when compared to the basic exercise. You have full extension of your arms and you are aiming to keep your hands at the same level throughout the cut. The level is just different. As with the basic exercise, remember to keep your wrists straight. To start off, anything but a completely horizontal cut is no longer a horizontal cut. This is also how most of the cutting competitions handle horizontal cuts. Anything off of a completely horizontal is penalized. I take a bit of a different look at this. I take the application of the cut and the movement pattern into consideration. This leads my opinion to be that there is considerable gray area between horizontal and diagonal cuts. This is also naturally true with vertical cuts. On the screen there is a visualization of what I see roughly as vertical and horizontal. The lines are drawn plus minus 10 degrees from completely horizontal and completely vertical. This means that there is a 20-degree area for both vertical and horizontal cuts, leaving a 70-degree area for each diagonal cut. As I said, I think that the transition from horizontal and vertical to diagonal is a gray area. As such, don't take these numbers as an absolute truth, it is just a close enough visualization. Also, as mentioned, technically a horizontal cut is only horizontal if it is completely horizontal. Now that that is out of the way, let's see how to angle a horizontal cut. At this point, Let's make it clear, I do not have a new exercise for angling horizontal cuts. See the angling exercises for descending and ascending cuts for a more detailed explanation. For now, I'll just shortly talk about how to think about angling horizontal cuts. I hope that at this point it is very clear that an angled horizontal cut is only a very shallow diagonal cut. If it is an ascending or a descending cut makes no difference. There are basically two ways of thinking about this, and they both use the angling exercises for the diagonal cuts. You can either start from a horizontal cut and then start angling from it. Or you can start with a diagonal cut and then slowly angle it towards a horizontal cut. I recommend that you try both and see which one works better for you. But as said, you are simply cutting very shallow diagonal cuts. You just need to be very conscious about keeping level as the angle is so shallow. This is the horizontal part of the cut. Just like with the basic horizontal cut, a very small vertical change can cause a very noticeable issue with the cut. Everything else is just like a diagonal cut. Before we recap the contents of this episode, let's take a quick look at where we are in our cutting journey. At this point, you should be able to cut a basic long edge cut at any angle you wish to. The exercise for vertical cuts was in the episode How to Hold a Longsword. Angling that works just like angling a horizontal cut. Simply use the angling exercise for descending cuts. I also think that angling a vertical cut is trivial if you know how to angle a descending cut. That is also why there was no specific section for that. You should also be able to cut at any target you might need to. This brings us almost to the end of the second section of this series, which is basically the basic cutting skills any longsword user needs. The next episode is about thrusting, bringing the basic skills section of this series to a close. You might think that thrusting is not cutting, and you would be correct. However, there is a clear difference between how a training sword and a sharp sword behave in a thrust. My goal is not to only teach you how to cut, but to also teach you to use a sword in a martially viable way. That is why I decided to dedicate an episode to thrusting. But more about that in the next episode. Before we get to the recap of this episode, go and stab that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Take your time to learn the exercises and the progressions. Try not to advance too fast. Swordwind is your main training method. Listen for it for feedback on your edge alignment and power generation. Videoing your training is extremely useful, especially from the side. There are 3 ways to target a cut, one of which basically turns the cut to something else than a horizontal cut. Angling a horizontal cut turns it to a diagonal cut. You should be able to cut at any angle you wish to.